Hi everyone, welcome back. So in this video, I want to talk about this novel that I recently finished reading, that I was reading for really almost 7 months, the past 7 months. Not only because it's relatively long, it's about 2,300 pages, but also because I was doing other things, having a full-time job, reading other books, occasionally participating in 2 different book clubs, my own reading group. Anyways, let's talk about this great, really amazing novel. It's called The Thibaults in English. Originally in French, it is Le Thibault. And it's written by Roger Martin du Gard, or in English pronunciation, Roger Martin du Gard. Published originally in a serial form, in parts, in installments, over a period of 18 years, from 1922 to 1940. And the author was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1937, 3 years before the completion of the novel. But the novel had a decisive impact in him receiving the Nobel Prize. It was a major reason. The version that I read is a translation from French to Persian, or Farsi, Persian Farsi. Different names for the same language. And this version is published in 4 volumes. Let me show you briefly. It's pretty heavy. From this angle and then from this angle. In Persian, we read خانواده تیبو. The title is, it means the Thibault family. And a nice feature of this edition is that at the end of volume 4, we get a nice essay by Albert Camus about Roger Martin du Gard, his style and his significance. Okay, where was I in my notes? The English translation. As I was reading, I also went back and forth several times comparing the Persian translation with the English translation. The English translation is done by Stuart Gilbert. In English, the book is published in 2 volumes by the Viking Press. But the 2 volumes have different titles. The first part is called The Thibaults, and the second part is not called The Thibaults Volume 2 or Part 2. The title completely changes, and it is called Summer of 1914. Those 2 volumes were published in 1939 and 1941, respectively. I should mention the Persian translation is done by the amazing translator, Abolhassan Najafi. And the more I went back and forth between English, Persian, and a couple of times to the original French just to see the word choices, have a better understanding of the word-by-word translations, the more my admiration for him grew. I should also thank my dear friend Parastu, who introduced me to this novel, and we started reading it around the same time. In, I think, March this year, March 2024. So let me talk a little bit about the plot. And as I am talking about the plot, I will try my best to talk about the significance, the value, what makes this novel special. And I'll do my best to minimize spoilers. There will be very little, almost no spoilers, but there will be inevitably a couple. Some intentional, some unintentional. Okay, so let's get into the plot. Superficially, if you research, read descriptions about the novel, if you research a novel, if you go to Wikipedia, for example, you will find that people say it's a story about the lives of 2 brothers, the Thibault brothers, the sons of Oscar Thibault, Antoine and Jacques, and then a bunch of secondary characters, the father, their housekeeper, friends, and so on. But if you pick up the book and actually encounter the novel, you will see that a big chunk of the first volume, at least, is devoted to a story of 2 friends from 2 different families. One of them is Jacques Thibault, the younger son of the Thibault family. The other one is a boy named Daniel de Fontanen, And these two families, the de Fontaine and Thibault, they are different in many ways, and they have some similarities that we become aware of as we read more. One major difference between the two families is that the Thibaults are Catholic, the de Fontaines are Protestant reformers, and that's a source of tension. There's tension and dislike rooted in that religious difference. We find out from almost from the very beginning in the story. That's one of the main events, maybe the starting event of the story, is that people, teachers, school administrators, have found something. They have found a notebook that contains the notes exchanged between Daniel and Jacques, and they have misunderstood the relationship between these two teenage boys based on their notes. They think that maybe something erotic or sexual is going on between them. They are wrong about that. That's actually not the case. But the notebook is called the gray notebook because it's gray, and maybe you can think of it, the gray area. It's not yet formed. It's not yet fitting into any one of those adult categories. So anyways, this theme of misunderstanding itself becomes a major, recurring theme, especially for Jacques Thibault. From the very beginning of his life, he deals with misunderstanding, and he deals with a lot of situations where he is forced to, seems like he's forced to run counter to other people's understanding, to run counter to other people's expectations, go against convention, go against what is accepted by others, is second nature by others, and it's not even intentional. His very being, his very existence, his emotional disposition, his mental and emotional disposition is such that he shows up as an obstacle, as resistance against received wisdom, received convention. And initially, of course, this resistance is against his family and against his father, who wants to control him, for him to just be a good boy, not trouble him. So the father wants to control him, but cannot, at least not completely. And in his attempt to control him, gets very close to destroying his life, destroying his son's life. So anyways, let me backtrack. Initially, I was making this point that initially, it seems like the story is the story of a friendship between Jacques and Daniel, and that's how I got into the book. But after a while, you see how this is a subplot in a bigger story, and that grand story is indeed the story of the Thibault family. Du Gard, our author, he wants us to pay attention to this family, and occasionally he also, I think, wants us to think about the concept of family, just like he wants us to occasionally think about the concept of a nation, the big family. So we see, while we are learning about this family, we see the place of Jacques in that family history, his place as a sort of wild character, the black sheep of the family, and how that wildness has consequences both for him and for the family. Like, one consequence is that he connects his family to this other family, de Fontaines. They start to interact in a deep way. Different family members start to form friendships or relationships with each other, despite their religious differences. So this wild sheep of the family, Jacques, is not only a destructive force, and it's not primarily a destructive force. He is the one who connects. He is the one who creates connection, and ultimately he's the one, we can say, he's the one who creates life. He's a creative force, despite seeming like he's destructive. He is I think of him, I would suggest that he is really essentially a figure of a child, true child. And I'm using the concept child in the way that Jean-Francois Lyotard uses this. It's a key concept for him. In that, I'm going to very quickly read a passage for you from the introduction to a series of lectures we recently read with my reading group, Why Philosophize. Before those 4 lectures, there's a little introduction by Corinne, I think Corinne Onodu, if I'm not pronouncing her name incorrectly. So she writes, it is childhood through which the world holds on to us. The wound of being grasped by the world, which makes the philosopher speak and gives him the passive strength that can attest to a meaning already there. The meaning already there. All we need to do is not deny him. Just let it be and let it breathe. A passive strength that can attest to a meaning already there, a fragmentary meaning that makes his discourse incomplete and thus true. End quote. So the attitude of a tyrannical, oppressive father who wants to have complete understanding and complete control over his son wants to have a discourse that pretends to be complete, and with that insistence, because of that insistence, it ends up being false. It is a false discourse because it pretends to be complete. That's the attitude of a tyrannical father, and that's the attitude that Jacques Thibault is subjected to, has to go against. Okay, so this family dynamic is not the only thing in the novel. If it was the only thing, it would make the novel still worthwhile. It would still be an amazing reading experience, a story of a family, father-son relationship, sibling relationships between two brothers, between De Fontaine, siblings, brother and sister, their communications, miscommunications, their understandings and misunderstandings and occasional understanding that they occasionally manage to achieve. Much of the first volume and maybe the first two volumes is about the identity of the two brothers, their relationship, the relationships that they have with their father, the romantic relationships that they find, stumble upon, and how they fall in love, they develop romantic interest. And Antoine, for example, the older brother, Antoine falls in love with a woman named Rachel or Rachel. And we learn so much about him through his stance towards this romantic love, this romantic relationship. Not only through his in the moment responses to that relationship, but later on when we read about his recollections of this romance. It's a window into his soul. it's a window into his character. It's a way that we get a grasp on of his character, get an understanding, an angle on who he is. In volume 2, we see the development of Antoine Thibault, his development in his medical practice, his rise in society, the development of his identity, his judgment of others that is starting to become more and more clear and more strict. Things become clear to him. He becomes powerful, we could say. And there's a benevolence in that power. But there's also a little bit of pride and maybe a bit of narcissism. There are also lots of other events, both in the Thibault family and in the Fontaine family. Lots of drama that we don't need to get into right now. The third volume gives us another major aspect of what this novel is about, what makes this novel a historical novel. So in this third volume, we get a slow, very slow build-up, a painfully slow build-up to the onset of the First World War. And I think this is a really distinct side of du Gard's mastery, his masterful writing. He shows us two really important things. The first thing he shows us is he tries to reveal to us the factors that were pushing these countries toward a war. Things like the industrialist, capitalist greed, the greed for profit, and how that gets entangled with nationalist sentiments and incorporate how those, the greed for profits, the capitalist greed actually uses nationalism and nationalistic sentiments, the national pride, as an excuse for itself, as a lie, as a noble lie, not in that philosophical sense, but a disguise, a facade for itself. So the masses can actually go with it. They can go with it to serve a minority of people who want to gain more profit, who actually want this war. And he also shows us the movements for peace. He shows us people who are fighting to maintain peace, including the socialist organizations that were international, transnational socialist organizations who were working toward peace, but ultimately fail. What we get in this, with this very slow and very suspenseful build-up, is an understanding that the war was, yes, it was probable, it did make sense, but it was not inevitable. And I think that long suspense is du Gard's way of showing us that it's not, don't just because it has happened, don't just say it had to happen. And therefore, future struggles, future conflicts, and future wars, don't think about them like they were inevitable. They are inevitable. The quest for peace is a serious thing. It's a real thing. At least he suggests that we can have that, our minds open to that. The second thing that he shows us is how the relatively unreflective citizens of France, for example, or other countries, they went from believing that, of course, war will not happen. We're just going business as usual. We're hearing a lot about the possibility of war, but it's not going to happen. And they flip from that without any transitional period of reasoning. They flip to, oh, of course it's happening. Of course we need to enlist and go and serve our country. Of course we need to defend our country, of course. So that kind of course, from one position to its complete opposite position, is, I think, a realistic observation of how people actually relate to phenomena like the phenomenon of international conflict, unfortunately. But among these people, we also see a handful of more conscious, more conscientious characters who are really thinking through the situation, and they are aware of the significance of peace and the fragility of peace. And we even get, among those, we get a political assassination that is featured in the book, but it's also a historical event. It's the assassination of Jean Jaurès, who was a peace activist, a French politician and a peace activist. The end of the novel, something really interesting and strange happens, very unexpected. In my version, the last novel, fourth, towards the end, we shift from this third person, the perspective of a third person narrator who is all knowing and knows what is going on inside and outside of the characters, to a first person perspective. We start to read the diary entries of one of the characters. So that's how we get the rest of the story. And this rest of the story, this period coincides with the final days of the war in 1918. And I'm still thinking about what is actually happening with this shift in style and shift in perspective. I think du Gard is highlighting perspectives, the reality of perspectives, and what Friedrich Nietzsche would say, perspectivism, or Nietzschean scholars would say perspectivism. He's also showing, in addition to that, the fragility of life because of what is happening to this character. The fragility of his body, and at the same time, the value of life despite that fragility, despite that mortality and finitude. The value or the significance of this perspective that wants to announce itself before it dies. For example, just one thing. One of the things that goes on in the diaries during the final chapters is that our character is going through his memory material. He's going through his memories, and he's thinking about, these major memories that I have in my mind. Were there other witnesses that shared these memories? And for many of these memories, he finds that there were others who bore witness who were there who also can remember if he's gone, after he's gone. But he finds one memory, and for that one memory, he's the only person who is still alive and can remember that one event. So that one memory is really only his. And he realizes that when he dies, that memory will not exist for anyone else. So this kind of meditation gives the novel a philosophical dimension, which is, if you like that. But it's not too much. And it's not too much, and it's not in the style of someone like Hermann Hesse, who I dislike when he goes into philosophical dimension or the Jungian dimension. I don't go with him. I can't go with him. But du Gard I go with him, unlike Hesse. I'll say one last thing. In the book, we do get different aspects of human life. We get the family drama, the family dynamics, and we also get the social-political drama, the political conflict. But the book successfully separates these two domains from each other and shows that they both exist and they're not reducible to each other. And the characters that we are dealing with, they can participate to different degrees in these different domains. So Jacques, for example, is one character. It is true that he's one character. And he exists in multiple domains. He exists in the family domain, and he also exists in the political domain. But his existence in the political domain cannot be drawn from his family history. He is not determined politically. You can't predict him. You cannot say just because these things happen to him in his family life, in his upbringing, he's going to have this kind of political disposition, or his political attitude is explained. They are related, but one side is not determined by the other side. In other words, what I want to say is that we cannot say that he is not free politically because of his family history. Our author achieves something here. What he achieves is that both sides of human life, he gives us a fair and complex treatment of them, honors both sides, and the separation of those two. Not complete separation, but the distinction between these two spheres of human life. Okay, I think that's good. I can skip the rest of these notes. If you find a copy of this great novel, if you are interested in reading a novel that is at the same time a historical novel, a novel about family history, intergenerational conflict, sibling relationships, really sweet. Some of the moments in the relationship between the two brothers were really my favorite. Just because they were so sweet, so bittersweet. And there's a lot of tragedy. There's a strong tragic component to this story in general, but lots of beauty and lots of insights and beautiful observations. So I would recommend it in any language. And if you read it in a language different from Persian or English, or including those two, or French, I'm interested in knowing which language you read this in. So let me know. And thank you for staying until this point. Thank you for your attention. And I will speak with you soon.